All right, everyone. I want to talk to you guys about Japan's vision of creating its own fighter jet. Specifically, we're talking about the FX, which is anticipated to be the first ever domestic stealth fighter jet developed by Japan. And it's going to be a part of sixth generation aircraft. And right now, there are no sixth generation fighter jets. The most advanced fighter jets right now are all fifth generation aircraft. The Americans and the Russians have their own fifth generation aircraft. The Chinese reportedly have also their own fifth generation aircraft. But by the 2030s, the world will be witnessing sixth generation aircraft. And the Americans are anticipated to be the first to produce an operational sixth generation aircraft, but the Japanese are right now working on their own. And this is not the first time that the Japanese have talked about creating a domestic fighter jet. Over 20 years ago, or around 20 years ago, the Japanese produced the F-2 fighter jet with the help of the Americans, of course. But the vision of the Japanese for the F-2 was that it would be the spiritual successor to the Japanese Zero. The Zero was the aircraft that the Japanese used during the Second World War to fight against the Americans and their allies. So this is very significant, because what this really tells us is that while the Japanese are an ally to the Americans, they still will think about the days of Imperial Japan, and they still honor those days. They still honor Imperial Japan by talking about creating military technology that would be a spiritual successor to the weaponry that they had during the Second World War. And this is really it really reflects the soul of Japan. It really reflects the ideology that is within Japan, although most people don't see it, and most people, if you told them about it, would refuse to see it. There is an underlying ideology in Japan that glorifies the Japan of the Second World War, the Japan that was really a monster that butchered millions of people, a Japan that was expansionist and had an imperial cult that worshipped an emperor, and one that enslaved people and literally buried people alive, buried slaves alive. It was a very evil Japan. Right now, people think that Japan is all Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon and sushi and people who work really hard, and they build cars, and they watch anime all day. And that is, of course, definitely a reality. But there is another reality in Japan that people don't really like getting into, or they refuse to get into, and that is the nationalism that is within Japan. And you can sort of see this nationalism in its military technology, or in its aspirations in the defense industry, or the aspirations within the government. So to say that we want to create an aircraft that would be the spiritual successor to the Zero, that is reflective of this ideology. So when the Japanese began to develop the F-2, they wanted to make a domestic fighter jet, meaning they wanted this fighter jet to be purely Japanese. But the Americans came in and they said, hey, you better collaborate with us. You better collaborate with Lockheed Martin to develop this fighter jet. The Japanese resisted this, but the Americans pressured the Japanese to the point that they had to acquiesce to American demands, and about 40% of the F-2 was developed with American industry. 60% was done by Japanese industry. And so the Japanese do not want to repeat this controversy again. And when they started talking about creating the FX, which is going to be a part of the new wave of military aircraft, this sixth generation aircraft, the Americans began to pressure the Japanese about working with them to develop this aircraft. And the Japanese resisted this. The Trump administration began to pressure the Japanese to work with American industry, especially with companies like Lockheed Martin. And the Japanese really rejected the proposal of Lockheed Martin, because the Lockheed Martin made proposed a plan for a design for the aircraft, and the Japanese rejected this. The Japanese have decided to work with BAE Systems, which is a British technology company that develops defense weaponry. This fact makes me question, and I could be completely wrong about this, but it makes me question the use of the word domestic when talking about the development of this aircraft. Because if your vision is to create a domestic aircraft, then why are you working with the British? And I spent hours trying to find some kind of answer to this. I spent hours trying to see if maybe somebody in Japan explained this and reconciled the vision of a domestic aircraft with working with the British, but I couldn't find anything. But nonetheless, this is being marketed as a concept that would be Japan's first ever domestic stealth aircraft. Maybe the reason why they say this is because Japanese industry is going to be leading the design of this aircraft, and the British are simply going to help. And this plan would be done as opposed to just allowing the Americans to lead everything. Maybe that's what they mean by a domesticated or domestic stealth fighter jet. But nonetheless, you know, the point of me bringing this up is to talk about the politics of this. I don't really want to get into the technical characteristics of sixth generation aircraft but from what I've read, and just to give some details about it, from what I have read, sixth generation aircraft, or this FX fighter jet, is just going to be a fighter jet that specializes more on stealth. It's going to be better in stealth than fifth generation aircraft. It's going to be multi-purpose. It's going to be able to launch air-to-air missiles, but at the same time also able to launch air-to-land, air-to-sea missiles. It's going to have better radar systems, et cetera, et cetera. But really my focus, because everybody wants to focus on the technological details of the plane, but my focus is more on the political message that is being conveyed here by the Japanese. Because while this is being anticipated as the first ever domestic stealth fighter jet from Japan, this is also the first time that Japan has chosen to work with a country other than America in a major military project. This is the first time this has ever happened. And this may change in the future. It may be that in the future, Japan will say, okay, we'll work in some way with Lockheed Martin, et cetera, et cetera. But so far, this isn't happening. And this has upset the Americans, hence why the Trump administration tried to pressure the Japanese to collaborate with Lockheed Martin. The Japanese have refused. Initially, the Japanese were supposed to be working with Lockheed Martin, but they rejected the company's proposal, the company's proposed design for the aircraft. So what this really tells me is that the Japanese are conveying a message of autonomy. In other words, they don't want the Americans telling them what to do all the time. They don't want to be under the thumb of the Americans any longer. And this is really another sign of the Japanese pursuing autonomy. This is about autonomy. Japan telling the Chinese, hey, the Senkaku Islands belong to us, that is an expression of autonomy. That is an expression of wanting to be a major force in Asia. And I think the Japanese's main aspiration is to be the big powerhouse in East Asia. The Japanese telling the Americans, we really don't like Lockheed Martin's plan. It's too expensive. We're going to work with the British. This is a way for the Japanese to express autonomy. They don't want to be under American control. It's like when Germany gave the bird to the Americans and worked with the Russians to develop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. This was a way for the Germans to express autonomy, independence, and really to express rebellion against American control. It's the same reason why the Germans decided to be an ally with the Iranians and to work with the Iranians and to resist the Trump administration's policy against Iran. It was a way for the Germans to say, no, we don't want to be under the full control of the Americans. So really, Japan's plan for creating a domestic stealth fighter jet to work with the British, rejecting Lockheed Martin's proposal, all of this is an expression of autonomy, and it's a sign that the world is becoming more and more multipolar. It's a sign that the American empire is declining, and it is a sign that in the future we're going to be seeing regional superpowers have more leverage and control. And really, eventually, they're going to just completely break free from the American empire. And the Americans are going to more and more transition to isolationism. This is what I foresee in the future. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.